that we have two speakers. I'll introduce them one by one. We'll start with Gianpietro Basello, who is a PhD, who has a PhD from L'Orientale at the University of Naples in Italy, where he is currently an associate professor, and where he teaches the Elamite language. But he also told me just now that he also is responsible for teaching Akkadian, so he's a multilingual teacher there. He has worked since 2003 on the Iranian-Italian joint digital humanities project Dariosh, Digital Achaemenid Royal Inscription Open Schema Hypertext. And his research, interestingly, is not just limited to Achaemenid inscriptions and so on, but he is also interested in ancient calendars and systems of recording time.
Thank you very much indeed for this presentation. Thanks to all the organizers for this very nice conference. It's an honor to be here and to open it. And I think this topic is really, as was already said, is really new, original, fresh, and not only for the specialists of the Achaemenid period, but also for the specialists of previous and following periods, because I have already seen, I have already read in the papers that were shared before the conference, how much it is important what the literature that was developed in Achaemenid period for the Hellenistic period. So you know much better than me. So I think it is really important to choose a topic like this, literature, and to develop it from the Achaemenid period to the following periods. And also there are some reflects, something a lot actually to think for me about pre-Achaemenid period, so Elamite and so on. So let's start from the royal inscriptions. Okay. So royal inscriptions, especially the Achaemenid ones, have often been dismissed as repetitive and therefore as not being worthy of attention. Are not they just blatant propaganda? Can propaganda be also literature? Yes, actually it is so, as suggested by the organizers with the inclusion of the royal discourse in the program, and I completely agree. In the ancient Near East, the royal inscriptions represent a textual genre in itself. There was a tradition, there were models, there were codes and formulas. A royal inscription couldn't be improvised, but required a specific textual knowledge. We use labels like royal inscriptions, royal discourse, as if it was just one monolithic textual genre, but actually there were different subcategories, not equally literary. Here are some of them in rough order, of increasing length and literariness and of decreasing standardization. So here you have short ownership inscription, labels, votive inscription, building or foundation inscription, funeral inscription, annalistic inscription. And here are just a few examples. So this is a short ownership inscription, lapis lazuli knob made at the palace of King Xerxes. And of course, this is an architectural decoration. There couldn't be too much literariness here, of course. So for this reason, it is important to distinguish the different subcategories. Here is a label inscription. Oh, this is Cyrus, the relief of Cyrus the king. This is a votive, let's call in this way. This is very interesting. One of the few inscriptions on bricks. Ahura Mazda is mine, and I am of Ahura Mazda. Very quite intimate. And then building foundation inscription like DPD and DPG. We will have a look at these later. And of course, DNA, I think you know more or less the sigla of the Achaemenid inscription, Darius Naxirostam, the only inscription in Naxirostam that is on the tomb of Darius. And of course, Bisotun, let's call it an annalistic inscription. Before we start, I want to show you right away two treatments that I consider pioneering in presenting the Achaemenid royal inscriptions and literary works. Here is one by Philip Hoyse, 2009, Chapter 2, Inscriptional Literature in all the Middle Iranian languages. In this volume, the general editor is Elam Shater. And this is very important also because Oise put the Achaemenid inscription in the stream of tradition of later inscriptions, so Persian and Sasanian in Middle Iranian languages. And this chapter, more recent, in relevant volume published in 2021, the editor, you know the editor, Bruno Jacobs and Robert Rollinger. The chapter is by Adriano Rossi, the inscription of the Achaemenids, and here there is another perspective that we have no time to deal with, and this is about the language. The language attesting the inscription is likely to correspond to a literary artificial form of Old Persian. So not only the Achaemenid inscription are literature, but also the language, of course, is literary. So now I would like to start with some example of rhetoric in the Achaemenid royal inscription, just to justify my starting assumption that they are literature. And so this is a DNA. We have seen it already, trilingual in the upper register of the tomb of Darius. So Achaemenid royal inscriptions are often opened by an invocation to Ahura Mazda, which is not introduced as a direct speech of the king, but so the lacking of this introduction, the king says, probably originated as in a cultural, religious framework, as a hymn perhaps, and then it was adapted to the royal discourse, adding the king in the final section. We will have a look at it now. So, Ahura Mazda is the great god, and here there is a variation in the Babylonian text. The greatest of the gods, Ahura Mazda, the greatest of the god. So perhaps there is this variation is due to an adaptation to a cultural environment where the divine word was perceived as more plural than the Iranian one. And so Ahura Mazda, who established this earth, and here we have a verb which is very important, da. Jean Kellens wrote a relevant paper on it, and Professor Kellens concluded it hasn't to be translated as to create, but to establish. I agree with him, but perhaps it's just an issue relating to our understanding of the modern verb to create, because actually for Kellens, to create means to create ex nihilo, from nothing. And so, of course, Ahura Mazda didn't create from nothing, but he sorted out the matter. But in a way, I think that creation, even today, artistic creation is not from nothing, it's from paper, from on canvas, on color, matter. So I think we can translate to create, even if I agree that Ahura Mazda is not a creator from nothing, from ex nihilo. So Ahura Mazda, who established this earth, who established that heaven, and who established the man. And then we have an addition, an expansion, who established for man welfare, who established welfare for man. So you see how the discourse is expanded, adding, changing, replacing, and adding elements in this chain, in this sentence. And now the addition of the king, who Ahura Mazda, who made Darius king. So the progression, earth, heaven, man, welfare, culminates with the king. In this way, the king becomes the acme and target of all the preceding discourse. Until this point, it could have been just a religious hymn. The addition of the king shifts the whole perspective. Until the preceding class, the focus was the god. Now it becomes the king. We, as readers, have been moved from the god to the king. And now the god is just in a second line, in a way, with respect to the king. And here we have two hyperbaton, because you see one king of many. So Ivam, Shayathiam are separated by of many, and one commander of many. So here another hyperbaton and a variation. And this is another part, another section of the same inscription, DNA paragraph 4. I want to show you how the reader is addressed by the author of the text. So here we have, if you ever wonder with some different verbs in the three languages, how many are these people or countries? And of course, this is a rhetorical question to introduce in an unusual way the usual, very usual topic of the great number of governed peoples, countries. And of course, this is a fictitious direct speech. Now it's important to keep this in mind. If you wonder how many are the people countries that Darius king held, look at the figures. And so here you have a visual deixis exploiting the phatic function of the image. Following Jacobson function of language, the text uses the image to establish contact with the readers, actively engaging them. And look at the figure that bear the days of the king. And of course, you have to look actually at the figures depicted and carved on the stone of the tomb, Naxirostan. Then you will know. Then will become known to you. You see, it is a kind of tautology with respect to the preceding class, obtained through variation in wording, including the verb in Old Persian and Babylonian, but not in Elamite. So there are different selection, different choices among the three languages. And this is, of course, the acme of this climax. The spear of the Persian man has gone far. And you see the different order of the Persian man is not the grammatical subject, is the logical one, and so it is at the beginning. Even if the subject is the spear, of course, the spear has gone far. And so the word order thematizes the Persian man, even if it is not the grammatical subject. Here there's a repetition, then will become known to you. And here again, a repetition, but with variation and expansion. And so you see the expansion. The concept of distance and vastness is now specified as from Pārsa. Sorry, let's translate it before. So the Persian man, now he's the subject, the grammatical subject. Far, as fought, a battle, far from Persia. So now far was also before, in far, the spear has gone far. But now it's far from Persia. So there is an addition that add meaning, a lot of meaning, because what started as the periphery, far, just far, now is the periphery, with respect to a center, Persia, Pārsa. So there is a lot of thinking, I think, literary thinking behind the drafting of this text. And so this is another example. Unfortunately, I think I have no time to deal with it, but another way to engage the reader. Here in a translation by Rahim Sharigan. So we have seen how the different languages interact. The trilingual character is another literary feature in itself of the inscription. It is both a merit and an achievement of the project Darius. Thanks for mentioning it before, Mark, also because it's a very difficult acronym. Thanks to this project has approached the Achaemenid corpus with an integrated perspective, considering the different versions as complementary, not simply translations of the Old Persian one, even if probably it was so in many cases, but not always. So it is important to think that the translation, of course, as you know, are not the same of the original. There is an interpretation, and this interpretation was provided by the same people involved in the drafting of the royal discourse. And so let me remind you, the Project Darius has been established at l'Orientale University of Naples by Professor Adriano Rossi, and now is progressing with the involvement of the Louvre Museum, thanks to the keeper Julien Cuny, and thanks to him, we have checked a lot of inscription, collating them. For us, it's very important to collate. Now, another issue, the role of the royal chancellery. A key point to understand the royal inscription as literature is that the king is not the author, even if it is nearly always reported that he is fictitious direct speech. Not by chance, drafting royal inscription was part of the scribal curriculum at least since the Old Akkadian period, so 3rd millennium BC. Such a misunderstanding also arises from this formula that you know for sure, says Darius the king. Darius the king says, and then starts the direct speech. And it is used, this formula, so many times in Bisotun, nearly everywhere. Notwithstanding this, the role of orality in the composition of royal inscription should not be overemphasized. Even if direct speech is widely used, it doesn't mean that those words were actually pronounced in order to draft the written text. In a society where the usage of written text was not pervasive as ours, it was normal to emphasize the oral dimension as means of communication also in a written text. Furthermore, there was a need for legitimization of the written discourse. A written text, being removed in time and space from its emitter, lacked the authority of a communication issued in person. So, for this reason, oral discourse was important, even in a written text, because the orality had some authority, some kind of relevance from this point of view, legitimization. Instead, orality played a relevant role in the subsequent dissemination of the royal discourse, as explicitly stated in the famous passage Bisotun, paragraph 70, here in the new reading and translation by Marco Fattori, which is really this new collation of the rock is very important. Unfortunately, we cannot read it in all Persian because I have no time, but so, with the help of our Mazdas, this is the text which I made in Aryan. It is filed both on clay and parchment. I added a signature. Actually, in Elamite, it is quite clear. I added a titulary and the genealogy, but this is all Persian. And it was written and read aloud before me. Then I sent this text everywhere across the countries. The people repeated and learned it. This is written in the inscription. And here we have a nia pithia, which is a passive, no? So it was written, I, Darius, wrote it, no? So, not I wrote it. So the king himself, in his fictitious speech, admits that it was not written by himself. So, this is confirmed over the long term by the reception of Achaemenid motifs in the Sasanian period, as shown by Shaigan in his book Aspect of History and Epic in Ancient Iran. And so, this is, I think, a relevant confirmation of this fact. The king was not the author. And so, here I would like to excerpt a passage from the relevant work by Heuse mentioned above. It has to be read, of course, in the wider framework of his contribution, but let me quote it alone just to discuss some common misconception, in my opinion. Some of Xerxes' inscriptions are almost identical to those of his father. For this reason, Xerxes was often reproached as a weak and effeminate ruler, with no sense of originality, but this long predominating negative picture, based mainly on Greek sources, need correction, since by copying his father's inscription word for word, Xerxes, on the contrary, corroborates his legitimacy as successor to the Achaemenid throne. So I agree with this conclusion. Xerxes' legitimacy is correct, but I would reach it starting from the assumption that the agency is not by the king, but by the royal chancellery. The simple fact that the formulas do not change when the king changes shows that these were not ipsissima verba of Darius, Xerxes, etc., Just like the iconography and style of the reliefs depicting the king don't change, no? So it's exactly the same. The iconography doesn't change, and also the inscription, but because it was not the king, the author. So royal inscription couldn't be used to grasp the personality of the king. This was not the purpose. Otherwise, one incurs in what I would like to call personalization fallacy. And of course, it is a risk that everyone has forced myself, no? Because always we say, the King Darius did so and so. Of course, it was not the king, the chancellery, the army, his collaborator, his staff. But of course, it's also normal, of course, to personalize. And this is an evidence that could be mentioned because in a way you can think this evidence from the Neo-Assyrian period contradict what I was saying. Because here you see the king is asked to be involved in the process of setting up a royal inscription. But if you read it carefully, I will share afterwards my complete, all the text that I am mentioning. Sorry that I didn't it before the conference. So just a few lines. If the king so orders, let the name of the king be written on the stele, and we shall build it. So actually, you can see here that the king is involved in the setting up, but not in the writing. For the king, the text of the inscription is just his name, Shumu in Akkadian, no? That is to write the name. This was enough. There was no need for the king to be more involved in the wording, in the details, and so on. And so, this just to provide a bigger picture. This is, again, Neo-Assyrian evidence, and I think it is interesting to understand the process of setting up a royal inscription, but not, again, proving that the king was not involved directly in the drafting of the text. At this point, I should have provided you with a comparison with the Mesopotamian and Elamite royal inscription. Of course, Elamite is my main focus, but I think I have to skip this. So I just limit myself to say that this comparison has to be made at different levels. So the context, location, accessibility, movability, the materiality, material, shape, size, contents, and the text also can be analyzed at several levels: structure, themes, wording, lexicon. And if you will check later this text, this is an Elamite inscription, for example, mentioning the origin of the word, at least in our understanding of the language, you will see it is completely different in language, in wording from the Achaemenid inscription, the opening of Aura Mazda, the creation of Aura Mazda that we have seen before. And so the theme, the topic are the same. Also the structure are the same at the start of the inscription, but the wording is completely different. And this is not, for me, it's not due to the fact that, of course, Old Persian is Indo-European, Elamite is an isolate, Babylonian is Semitic, because also the translation of the versions, Babylonian, Elamite of the Achaemenid inscription, the wording and lexicon is different from the previous tradition, their previous tradition, of the previous kings. And so this, for me, it's a relevant point. From the point of view of the topics and themes, here there is a list made by Professor Scervo, which is very interesting, just very, very quickly. Victory over numerous opponents in 1 year, comparison with ancestors and predecessors king, building inscription, origin of the royal power. So all these topics were already in Elamite and Babylonian inscription. So the themes are the same, but again, the language, the details are completely different. Just to add something new, this is a Middle Elamite inscription, and we have a curse. Also the curses against the enemies are part of the royal discourse. We have one. We have it also in Bisotun, but again, it is completely different also in the Elamite version. I put here just the Old Persian one. And so, the Iranian heritage. According to Chervo, I am quoting what is written there, the complete literary heritage of the Achaemenids is therefore the sum of their Iranian heritage and the influences they were exposed to after their ancestors separated from the other Iranians. So, therefore, if the ancient Near Eastern influences are not enough to explain the wording and lexicon of the Achaemenid royal inscription, one should check the Iranian heritage, whose extant survivor is the Western corpus. Chervo explained very well the caveats of this approach, since the Avesta in the Achaemenid period was not the written Avesta that we know today. And this is a problem I think we will find also for biblical sources. Chervo's investigation, while showing convincingly the similarities in wording and lexicon between the Achaemenid royal inscription and the Avesta, in some cases he found Avestan quotations in the royal inscription, also showed that at least some parts of what would have become later Avesta were indeed in existence in the Achaemenid period. For me, this is really important because it's a relevant proof that there was already, because the dating of Avesta has been a lot discussed. For me, it's difficult to think that it is so ancient with respect to the first manuscript. But actually, these quotations in the Achaemenid inscription, for me, are very relevant. And this is the seminal paper by Professor Chervo. So I believe Avesta should have its own place in the landscape of local literate cultures whose impact on the empire we are investigating in this workshop. So I have quoted part of the wonderful presentation of the topic in the program of the workshop. So, of course, I consider the culture that gave origin to the Avesta as capable of sparking literary particles, even if it was illiterate, concluding that we should not necessarily couple orality with lacking of written literature. So this is a delicate point, but I just want to share very briefly my thoughts. I know there are experts in the audience, more experts than me, and I'm open, of course, to their criticism. So Avesta, okay, this is exactly what I had already read. So, to conclude, echoes of Achaemenid formulas in the biblical literature. Let me check. Okay. This workshop has arisen from the assumption that the empire had an impact on the local literate cultures that came under its political grasp. Otherwise, they would not be useful in reconstructing a literary history of the empire. Since, as briefly reported above, paragraph 17, new translation, the royal discourse had been purportedly spread through various media by the state apparatus, it wouldn't be surprising if echoes of it can be found in writings of the same or following period, like the writings that later became part of the Bible. I'm not a specialist of biblical literature, and I cannot go further in discussing this literary historical background. And here comes, luckily, in my head, the paper by Conrad Schmid, because I had the chance to read it before. And so there is no need for me to deal with it, because this most relevant paper that will be delivered later, everything is dealt in, for me, so much excellent way. And for me, it's so relevant for what I'm saying. So the royal inscription places great emphasis on the number and variety of peoples and countries governed by the Achaemenid king. These lists are quite famous and well known, and a distant echo of this practice is perhaps surviving in the list of peoples, countries from which came Judeans to celebrate the Pentecost in Jerusalem according to Acts of the Apostles 2. But this is another story, and I leave it aside because there are a lot of discussion going on. And I just want to present very quickly what I presented in the second Achaemenid workshop in Innsbruck, in Obergurgl, 2 years ago. A wonderful place in the mountains. So very briefly, of course, it was not always possible to enumerate all these people countries, also for lacking of space on the text carrier. So in this inscription, DPH, an inscription on 4 metal plates found in 2 foundation deposits at the corners of the so-called Apadana in Persepolis, there is only a double from to assessment. And we can read it very quickly. This is the kingdom which I hold from the Scythians beyond Sogdiana to Kush, from Indus to Sardis. And here there is a nice comparison with the book of Esther, starting, of course, a book where a biblical book where there is a Persian setting, even if, to my knowledge, it is considered dated to a later period. We have, once in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who was king over 127 provinces from Indus to Kush. If you read this in a modern translation, you will find Ethiopia instead of Kush. But of course, it's the same country, the same region, and it is relevant because it is exactly the word used in the Achaemenid inscription, from the Scythian to Kush, so exactly the same, Kusha, Kushaya, Kushu in the 3 different languages. And here you have also India. And for me now, 2 years ago, I was not so much convinced. Now I am more. So in Hebrew, it is written Oddu, India. And also in modern Hebrew, India is Oddu. And to my knowledge, it is the only language where India is lacking the nasal. And if you look at the writing, not the transcription, the transliteration, the hyphen, not the one with the hyphens, you can see that in Old Persian, Indau is written Iduv. And this is normal in Old Persian. Of course, for several reasons, pre-occlusive nasal were not written, also in cuneiform already. But so, I think perhaps today I feel more confident to say that perhaps, of course, it is possible that the very name of India in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, modern Hebrew, came from Old Persian, but written Old Persian, not the spoken one, of course, where then would have been written. So a very quick last point, going back to the creation, that was my starting point. In the last years and last decade, there were these 2 relevant articles about correlation about Genesis in the Bible and the Achaemenid inscription, the Persian Achaemenid period. I just want to stress this one by Marco Settembini, between Persepolis and Jerusalem, creation and origin of sin in the light of some Persian tradition. And these traditions are the ones written in the Bundaishn, in this wonderful translation by Domenico Agostini and Samuel Thorpe. You can find everything, the story of Masha and Mashane, the first couple, And so there are a lot of parallels with the Genesis, but these are middle Iranian sources. But so today I think we can state that the creation of Ahura Mazda in the Achaemenid inscription has some echoes also in the creation of the Genesis. If you check the sequence, the emphasis also on earth, heaven, the role, the creation in the Genesis is by word. This is relevant again, the word, the oral, the spoken word of the king or of the god in this case. And a new translation, a new reading of another inscription, DPG, that will be mentioned also later, luckily because it's very important and I have no time now. We have collated it in the framework of Darius project. This was the documentation 2008. And here is the new reading and translation by Sohail Delshad, and you will find a different creation of Ahura Mazda, which is, of course, another version, another expansion, another version. And here you see Ahura Mazda, who created the heaven and the earth and created water. So here we find again water, which is so important also, of course, in Zoroastrianism, in Middle Iranian text, the one from Bundain, for example, but also already in the Achaemenid inscription. This was not read in this way before. And so now we know that water is also mentioned in the creation according to the Achaemenid oral inscription. And I see another echoes perhaps or consonance with the Genesis, where of course the water, the abyss had a role. And so again, I had to shorten a lot my paper, but you can refer to the paper by Marco Settembrini, who shifted the attention towards the Iranian sources, including the Achaemenid one, in order to read in a new way, complementary way, the Genesis. So this is that's it. Thank you so much for listening to my paper, and I'm happy to listen to the following paper. Thank you so much.